No mic today. Sorry. Hi, my name is Eliza, and I am a college student studying psychology and forensic anthropology. I make videos about both of those, as well as occasional film reviews by someone who doesn't really know anything about film. Now, this video does not go into details about the gruesome atrocities that Richard Chase committed. I'm more focused on his development as it was for his psychology class, as well as the victims, because I never wanted this to glorify again. And I'm gonna say this in every video, and it's not really gonna change right now. Sorry for the glare. I need my glasses to read, and I'm reading from my computer. Richard Chase, also known as the Vampire of Sacramento, was born May 23rd, 1950 to Richard Edward Chase and Beatrice Lorraine Niece Chase. Chase's parents were very authoritative and regularly beat both Richard and his younger sister Pamela. Richard exhibited odd behavior from a very young age, possessing all three traits on the serial killer triad, those being bedwetting, which is abnormal after the age of 5, setting fires, and torturing or killing small animals. As he grew up, his parents' relationship slowly got worse, which may have distracted them from their son's disturbing and abnormal behavior. One notable habit of Chase was an activity he would do when his family was out of the house. He would turn the home thermostat up to 90 degrees. He would take off all of his clothes, and then he would lay on the living room couch or on the floor, completely drenched in sweat. Richard would also kill household cats in his neighborhood and inspect their organs. This period was also the start of his blood consumption. Richard Chase had Renfield syndrome, which is drinking blood, also known as vampirism. Despite these odd behaviors, Chase was not the social outcast you may expect. In high school, he had no problems with friends, school, or girls, although all three of these would change throughout high school, which he almost did not graduate from. What may have been the start of his blood obsession was his impotence. His sexual frustration gave him the insatiable desire to drink blood. He believed that his impotence was caused by him not having enough blood, and the only way he could solve that was by drinking it. As he grew older, he developed more and more disturbing and odd behaviors. After graduating high school, Chase sought out a psychiatrist for help resolving his sexual frustrations, as well as his emotional distress. The psychiatrist told him that the cause of his impotence could be repressed anger towards women. However, this had no impact on Richard, who still believed he just didn't have enough blood. He moved out of his house and into an apartment with a few roommates who were not fond of him. According to them, he was frequently naked, constantly seemed paranoid, and under the influence of drugs most of the time. One roommate described a night where Chase boarded himself in his room and hid in his closet, nailing the door closed because, in his words, he was being sneaked upon from the inside. It was around this time Chase stopped taking care of himself entirely. Richard, who was in a constant state of dishevelment, became more and more isolated as his friends stopped wanting to hang out. His father expressed concerns over his appearance, but his mother denied it being a problem and more of a stylistic choice. When Richard's roommates attempted to kick him out and he refused, they left instead. He moved back in with his mother, who still denied her son becoming increasingly abnormal. It was around this time in his life where Richard was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and was involuntarily committed to a mental hospital for 72 hours. He left the hospital despite the recommendation for him to stay. His mother later told the staff that she decided to handle his problems at home. Richard's mother, his biggest fan and enabler, repeatedly sabotaged the work that Richard's doctors put in to help him. She fully believed that there was nothing wrong with him, and even after he was put on medication for his schizophrenia, she weaned him off of it because she believed that he acted like a zombie. Like it made him act like a zombie. One day she came home hearing loud noises from outside. She discovered Richard in the process of disemboweling a cat and painting himself with its blood. She did not report this incident. Richard would not stay with his mom for long. He was a budding schizophrenic and was already experiencing delusions about himself and others around him. He shaved his head because he believed that the bones in his head were moving under the skin, that bones were growing out of the back of his head, his heart stopped beating, someone stole his pulmonary artery, and his blood would stop flowing and turn to powder. Repeated trips to the ER would deny his claims, but it made no difference to him, and while living with his mother, he was convinced she was trying to poison him. He quickly evacuated her house, and his father paid for him to move into another apartment. This time alone! While living on his own, still funded by his father, Richard began what may have been his most absurd hobby in his lifetime. So Richard had a new delusion, one that his heart was shrinking, and it would soon disappear if he didn't consume blood. A combination of his schizophrenia and a symptom of Renfield syndrome, also known as clinical vampirism. Really sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. I don't know if it's vampirism, vampirism. He lived near a pet shop that he would regularly visit to buy rabbits. After bringing the rabbits home, he would kill and disembowel them and sometimes put them in a blender and then drink the remains. One time, he believed that he had consumed a rabbit who had consumed battery acid in its life, and he thought the logical answer was to inject himself with healthy rabbit's blood. However, this gave him blood poisoning and he was hospitalized. Richard Chase was committed to the mental hospital on numerous occasions for his psychotic behavior and delusions. He was put on antipsychotics, which had little effect, and doctors believed that it was because he was in a state of drug-induced psychosis. During one of his stays at the mental hospital, a nurse walked into his room to find him covered in blood, biting the heads off of birds he caught from his window. However, he claimed that blood was because he accidentally cut himself shaving. Chase grew a reputation in the hospital, and staff referred to him as Dracula, which is telling. When he was released from the hospital, it was by the decision of his doctor, despite every single other member of the staff strongly disagreeing. On August 3rd, 1977, police found his car in the middle of a Nevada desert. Inside the car were multiple rifles, a pile of clothing, a bucket of blood, and a liver. They soon found Chase himself, who was perched naked on a rock, completely covered in blood. He attempted to make a run for it and failed. At the police station, they concluded the blood and liver were from a cow and released him. Before this incident, he had become obsessed with guns, and due to the gun control in place in the lovely United States of America, someone like Richard Chase was able to attain multiple firearms. He regularly practiced shooting with his forming collection, but he became bolder after being released from police custody without receiving any consequences. A few months later, he shot and killed a man named Ambrose Griffin. The 51-year-old engineer turned to his wife after she heard 2 loud pops. He was carrying groceries and fell to the ground by what she assumed was a heart attack. Later that night, however, she would find out that her husband's life had been stolen by an unknown man that had left her alone with their 2 sons. Richard Chase later killed a woman named Terry Wallen. Terry was only 22 years old and was pregnant at the time. The atrocities that Chase committed were in her house were discovered by her husband, who had arrived home shortly after her murder. Police continued investigating with no leads, but they began creating a profile that perfectly matched Chase. Before any leads were made, however, Richard was able to commit his next and most murders on a spree killing. Evelyn Miroth, a 36-year-old woman, was killed in her house, along with her 6-year-old son Jason, Daniel Meredith, and her nephew, a 22-month-old David Ferreira, who Chase took with him and whose body would later be found in a parking lot. This horrific scene was found by a neighbor. Soon after, Richard Chase was found after a woman recognized him as a former high school classmate and told police. His apartment was less than a mile from the murders he had recently committed. Police waited by his apartment before spotting Richard and forcefully detaining him. Inside his apartment was enough evidence to convict him of every murder he ever committed. Now, despite having an average IQ, Chase's lack of intelligence was made apparent when he wrote the word "today" on the dates of both the Miroth and Wallen murders on a calendar in his apartment. After his arrest, he was put on trial in 1979 for the murders of 6 people. After trying and failing to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, he was deemed clinically sane to stand trial and was convicted of first-degree murder on all 6 counts. The rest of his life was spent behind bars, where he was put on antidepressants, which he stockpiled and used to commit suicide. Now, I believe that presenting on Richard Chase, or any serial killer for that matter, without addressing the past, present, and future of mental health care would make this presentation nothing more than a story about a bad guy who did bad things. I also want to preface this by saying that none of the following information is in any way an attempt to garner sympathy for a serial killer. The truth is, there were many red flags in his childhood that were ignored. Whether that was on purpose or not, it prevented someone with dangerous behaviors from receiving any form of treatment that possibly could have prevented the atrocities he would go on to commit. Mental health was seen as a taboo subject in Chase's time, and to some degree, it still is today. It was only in 1960 that insulin coma therapy was retired. The belief that a child having a mental illness reflected poor parenting was a very strong held harmful belief, and although we have progressed with mental health care since the 70s, mental illnesses such as schizophrenia are still widely misunderstood and therefore not treated properly. Schizophrenic people are often ostracized and have a very difficult time fitting in with society. Despite making up 1% of the population in the US, it's estimated that 20% of the homeless population is affected by schizophrenia. The largest mental institution in the United States is the prison system, which is not adequately designed to treat mental illness. Mentally ill people who commit crimes do still need to face the consequences for their actions, but the institutions responsible for delivering those consequences are not designed as much to treat the mentally ill as they are to punish the mentally ill. With more time and resources poured into mental health research and social programs to prevent people with severe mental illnesses from ending up in prison, a future where mentally ill people are treated rather than exploited could be possible. Thank you. I don't know how many videos I'll be able to film in the summer because I'm working a lot. If my next video is filmed in a dorm room, it's because I'll be in college. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.